Welcome to the General Counselling podcast from Montresor Legal. General Counselling is the legal podcast where we bring together leaders from private practice together with the cream of in-house to get their insights on the latest from across the legal landscape and share it with our network. Today is our first podcast, so I'm delighted you found us. Please do hit subscribe or leave us a review if you like what you hear. We'll be putting out new episodes bi-monthly, so follow us via the Montresor Legal LinkedIn page or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're going to be focusing in on one of the jewels of UK PLC, venture capital and high growth companies in tech and other sectors. So I could not be more excited about the two guests we have joining today. From the private practice side, we have Tony Waller, one of, if not the leading corporate partner specializing in high growth tech businesses from CMS.
Flattery will get you everywhere, Tom.
Their Equip program. So Tony, welcome. Do you want to give us a quick overview on CMS and the Equip program?
Yes, sure. So as you say, I'm a corporate lawyer. I spend my days supporting owner-managed businesses grow to scale and then exit. I do that pretty much exclusively in the technology sector and have done for the last 20 years. So seen plenty of ups and downs in that market and lots of successes along the way. And as you say, one of the things that I'm having fun with at the moment is a program that we started about 4 years ago now called Equip, which is our curated startup program designed to support some of the best startups out there in the market in the early stages of their growth through to success and beyond. So yeah, that's me.
Perfect, thanks very much. And on the client side, we're joined by Ben Robson. Ben is counsel at the hugely exciting venture capital firm Draper Esprit. Ben, welcome. How would you describe Draper Esprit?
How would I describe? Well, in a nutshell, leading European VC, doing some amazing work with some high growth scale-ups, focusing mainly on Series A and B across four main sectors: enterprise, digital health and wellness, hardware, electronics and consumer tech, and portfolio boasts the likes of UiPath, GraphCore, Revolut, Trustpilot, Kazoo most recently. And our idea is to work with the best entrepreneurs in Europe who have global ambitions to really take them to the next level and obviously get a big result for our shareholders. And I say shareholders because we're somewhat unusual because we IPO'd ourselves in 2016 and we're quoted on the AIM market. So we've got an unusual model because we actually invest off our balance sheet and can be there for the long term. So we've got an evergreen model that means that we can really ride this thing out rather than being caught in the more conventional five-year VC model. So that's sort of Draper in a nutshell. And as I say, I was only recently joined. I came in Jan, so with some help from Montresor Legal. And at the moment it's a team of one, but we are scaling out because we're doing some good things and we need more legal support.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the plug. Cool. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing COVID, the market in high growth businesses, both in tech and other sectors, and advice from these guys on what makes a great lawyer in this space. So, I mean, let's get COVID out of the way first. What do you guys see as the most significant impacts the pandemic's had on sort of fast, high growth businesses and the investors into them?
Okay, so I'll take that one to start off with, Tom. So actually, I think the surprising thing is actually how well the market has stood up. So I think lots of people in disaster mode at the beginning of the year would have thought that it was all going to be bad news, but actually we really haven't seen that. We're in a great position to look right across the market. So CMS has a very large venture capital team, quite a number of partners dealing with it, and I'd say every one of us has seen continued investment in high growth technology businesses. And whilst it has certainly slowed, I saw some figures the other day that I think suggesting that To date in the UK, for example, venture funding has equated to about 6.6 billion. And whilst that is down on last year, it's quite heavily down on last year, actually about 22% down on last year. Let's not forget, 2019 was a banner year for tech investment. And the levels of investment thus far in what supposedly you would think it would be the worst part of the year are still significantly ahead of the investments being made in the same period, even 5 years ago. So it's still looking good, I would say. And what we've seen is businesses, yes, they've been forced to take measures to address what's been going on, but the maturity in the market is really interesting. So definitely seen businesses take a sensible approach to cost management. They focused on cash retention. Yes, their plans for growth may have been slightly deferred, but they've not gone away. And now we're starting to see, as people sort of emerge from lockdown, much more inquiries about restarting expansion, thinking about that both nationally and internationally. My sense from your perspective as well is that people are hiring again and they're keen to get back out there in the market and grab talent where they can. So I think people have emerged from that sort of short-term hibernation and they're back in business.
I think we've heard a few things on especially on that, maybe more private equity than venture capital, that people have been moving, because a lot of on the business side, the people who had funds set up that are now so underwater on the private equity side that their carry is so far away that there's actually been quite a heavy amount of movement on some of the portfolio managers in some of the larger private equity firms. But that always, in order to have that, you also have to have the demand of other people bringing them on. And yeah, Ben, I think you were saying we've started to see that again in the sort of late summer, autumn.
Yeah, look, I would completely echo Tony's comments, because what we saw was that initial, very understandable knee-jerk reaction of where the world has never seen this. Where does this leave us as a business? A lot of panic in the short term, and recut budgets, worst case scenario planning. And we work very closely with founders and management teams to sort of quickly try and work out where cash could get saved, and also put in place these sort of real doomsday scenarios which haven't manifested. So there's probably some sector variations on that. If we don't have much of a focus on say hospitality, travel, that kind of area, obviously they may be a different story. But what we found was this sort of surprising bounce back, and it happened much sooner than anyone was anticipating. So in terms of our sort of plans for investment, initially it was a case of expecting to really have to double down on our own portfolio, but actually it became apparent that when sales figures were bouncing back within say 3 or 4 months, it suddenly facilitated the discussions we thought we would be having with other opportunities out there. And actually we've been in some really competitive rounds where there's a lot of appetite for new deals, which wasn't, I think if you'd have asked me 6 months ago, 5 months ago, we wouldn't have been having the same conversation. But I think it's a testament to the kind of businesses we're talking to, that tech focused high growth model was better adapted than lots of other industries, particularly long established ones, and I would include the law within that to a degree, who had to really quickly sort of have this shift in pace, whereas actually remote working, for example, just wasn't a problem for almost any of our portfolio companies, because they were all so tech enabled. So I think it's almost, and this is probably the kiss of death, but it's almost business as usual. That's what it feels like at the moment, and we're very optimistic about where we can deploy in the coming months and years ahead.
One other point I just wanted to add there to what Ben was saying is that one of the interesting things that I've seen over the course of the 9 months is quite different to what I've seen in other recessions. So in other recessions, what we've seen is quite a marked shift in the approach investors have taken to investment terms, and obviously putting in place much more quickly more robust investment terms away from the more investee friendly terms that we've been seeing over the last few years.
But actually, that really hasn't happened. Investors have stuck to their guns. They've stuck to the model they've been using for the last few years, and have kept investment terms very much in line with what we've been seeing over that same period. And that's great news for owner managers, because we're not seeing it being harder to get access to the capital. In fact, investors are keeping their ethos and their approach, and that's to be lauded, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. I mean, we obviously have a big exposure to the law firm sector, but what you guys are saying there, in that there has been a reasonably significant flow of confidence back into the UK market, is absolutely shown in what the law firms are doing. Like, you've seen quite a number of them who put salaries on hold or frozen, or maybe even reduced them for a bit. They've started to relax those or go back to them, which, when you're anecdotally talking to partners in law firms, most of them are actually having not a bad run, and almost the bigger problem they have is not wanting to shout about it, because, as Ben was saying, there are some sectors that are unavoidably having a really bad time, like the hospitality sector and elsewhere. So obviously we're in best guess territory as to what goes on from here. So I won't hold you guys to any of this, but if you were going to give us your best predictions for the next 6 months into 2021, what do you see happening?
So I think it sort of depends on what happens in the next couple of months, quite strongly. I personally, despite Mr. Trump's assertions, I'm not a big believer that we'll be seeing a successful vaccine anytime soon. So I think what that means is that we're all thinking about, how do we manage risk? My sense is that, as we were saying, people for the first lockdown allowed things to pause, weren't too concerned about the pause, and have come back strongly out of that first lockdown. If we were to go into a national lockdown again this side of Christmas, I think that could have quite a significant impact on people's views about what they should be doing with their businesses, and you'll see people shift to thinking much more about how they restructure for the future. If, however, as I hope, we don't go down that route, and we end up with what I think will inevitably be a series of local lockdowns, maybe a short, I've seen people talking about it, a circuit break at a national level, but very short. I think that actually what will happen is that COVID will just become, rather than being the number one risk that people have been worrying about, just one of the many risks that businesses worry about on a day-to-day basis, so that it will just get factored into what we're doing. And it'll feel much more like we're back to normal and carrying on to where we were at the beginning of the year.
I would just pick up on that there, Tony, because I agree that that's one trajectory. The fly in the ointment is we've got that B word somewhere in the middle of all of this. So
sure. Yeah. Tom was just asking about COVID, though. He didn't ask about it.
I appreciate that, but that's the time frame that we're talking about all dovetails with Brexit, and that's the interesting thing when you have furlough ending. I think we're all predicting mass redundancies within certain sectors, and then potentially quite a deep recession. There's various factors at play here, which I actually think the companies which we end up focusing on are to a degree insulated from some of the worst effects of that.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of a toxic melting pot at the moment, and trying to predict how those different parts will play out. We've got the US elections coming up. It has, at the moment, there's this feel that the UK government, they initially did well. Now it feels like there's a bit of uncertainty about the reaction and also this next.
Ben, can I take it from your thing on that? When you mention the B word, you're not excited about the shackles coming off the UK tech sector and us being able to pump unlimited state aid into our tech businesses.
Personal opinions aside,
I'm not excited about that.
Trying to focus it more on the COVID side. I think that this exactly what Tony said there. this next few months is absolutely critical, because everyone appreciates that we can't really do what we did last time. It was all being made up last time, and to an extent it will be again. And I think it's how we sort of protect the economy in an environment where the sort of pandemic becomes more rampant again. And there's so many unknowns in that, but I do think that certain businesses are better placed than others, nationally and internationally, to ride that storm.
Yeah. One of the things we noticed, I noticed over the summer, was every week there was a new US-based IPO, normally of a quite developed tech business, but not exclusively. And they all seemed to go incredibly well. I mean, they would list and then their prices would rocket up, and there seemed to be one every 5 minutes. We haven't obviously got that over here. What do you guys think the UK PLC can do to sort of close the gap a bit with the US in this space?
Well, look, the UK IPO market has been in the doldrums for a couple of years, at the very least, actually. It's, there are all sorts of reasons for that. Some of them are market driven, some of them are about what their markets actually offer. Some of them are about what people are seeing out there in the market. So from a UK owner-manager perspective, over the last few years, there's been an awful lot of private capital available, more than ever before. And that has meant that actually businesses that might have sought an IPO at an earlier stage haven't needed to here in the UK, and so have been stuck with the private investment route. Is it going to stay that way? Well, look, I don't think we're going to have a snowflake. One of the largest, I think the largest IPO that's ever taken place here in the UK. But talking to advisors, I am hearing them talk about green shoots. There are some, for the first time in a long time, I've heard some positive noises out of UK advisors who are in the IPO market. There have been a few IPOs that have got away in the last few weeks here in the UK, not necessarily in tech. Some of them are tech related, but I think they do see some positive opportunity in the coming months for the IPO market here. They've got a challenge though, because the brand, that sort of NASDAQ or US tech market brand, is so strong and so alluring for many of the European entrepreneurs. They want to rub shoulders with those big value beasts and the investors in them, and be seen to be standing alongside them. That certainly the UK market has got a lot to do to persuade entrepreneurs that they should be floating here. But there are lots of good reasons to do so. Practical reasons like it's not a long way away. Having a market close to you is actually, it's a very real and practical plus for many businesses. But equally, it's a less litigious environment. From a regulatory perspective, it is generally seen to be less complicated. There are good reasons to be floating on markets here. And I think one of the interesting things about the sheer success of the UK tech market in particular means that there are far more mature businesses who've gone through later rounds of funding, D, E, F rounds of funding than ever before. And that means you've got entrepreneurs who are keen. They're not just looking for an exit in the short term. They're looking to build businesses for the long term that they will want to own and run for the future. And certainly the traditional view has been that to achieve that, really you need to be on a public market. So look, I think there's reasons to be positive about the future. But I think also realistic about how easy it will be to gain the sort of successes we've been seeing in the US over the course of the last few years.
Ben, do you still, as a venture capitalist, see IPOs as the preferred exit for these businesses, or are there other alternatives to that route nowadays that you guys would want to?
Cool. Yeah, no, look, it's really going to depend on the business, and I think that's an education piece, both for founders and to a degree investors. But I think the notion that IPO is the only route is obviously a fallacy, and indeed statistically it's very unlikely to go all that way. There are lots of other meaningful exit routes, whether that's a trade sale, whether that's we've got, for example, UiPath in the portfolio, which is just growing and growing, and recently transferred our stake in TransferWise. But again, that secondary market can just keep those businesses going. They don't necessarily need access to public funds. But I was talking to our head of marketing, James Clark, who recently joined us from the London Stock Exchange, where he headed up the Tech and Life Sciences Primary Markets Division. I mean, his take on this was that the LSE was desperately screaming out for IPOs to happen because they felt that they were very well placed to do so, that they were trying to get these sort of these aggressively growing fintech companies to take the LSE seriously, rather than perhaps the US, the NASDAQ maybe. And it was a great frustration for him that there wasn't that sort of marquee name that almost made it viable for the others. So, I mean, the Hut Group have just announced on Wednesday that their IPO 10, and I mean that could be it. That could be the one which starts to sort of make it more plausible or realistic for some of those larger businesses, or at a size where they could, and whether IPOs become in the UK become more prevalent remains to be seen. I definitely think there are peaks and troughs. There's almost seasons, and if we get into a period where it's a hot area, you could see that becoming much more used again. But I think what the all too familiar thing is the startup, which don't realise how much work there is to do, and just lay it out on the table that they're going to IPO. And I think I'm sure Tony's encountered a few of those. What I would say is actually there is an amazing journey there, and it's all about getting the setup right and knowing what the goal is and how you get there. And that's educating, as I say, the entrepreneurs, but also the investors coming in to say, well, this is the stated aim, and trying to execute on that. It doesn't necessarily mean it will happen, but it's certainly a good place to start. And I will just share one other thing, because when I was talking to James about this, he was saying that lawyers have the uncanny ability to make IPO sound boring. and he was saying,
heaven forfend.
What he said was entrepreneurs don't mind and will relish the opportunity of something sounding hard or difficult. But if you make it sound boring, they won't be interested. So I think we've all got a part to play in trying to sell the upside of this, but also being realistic about it.
That's brilliant. So I mean, moves on nicely to actually like how lawyers can add value, and especially I think this is for anyone listening who is in a law firm, who's an associate or a junior partner. Thinking about how they can add more value to the clients that they're advising. Tony, you're obviously a very successful partner in a law firm. If you were looking at what makes a really good in-house lawyer in the tech space, what would you say the key attributes someone should show would be?
Look, I have never been an in-house lawyer, so let's. This is a one-sided view, and there is definitely another side to this. But from my perspective, looking at who makes a successful in-house lawyer and who doesn't, I think the person who's willing to define their own role with an organisation and take control over what they will and won't do, align that with the priorities of the management of the business, but allow the rest of the business to understand how you as a lawyer can add value. I think that's, if you can provide that clarity to the rest of the business, you are in a much better position than the in-house lawyer who unfortunately goes into a business and just finds themselves constantly firefighting with a myriad of issues that aren't necessarily the most important issues to the business, but are the ones that land on their desk day to day. It's an art to be able to sift through all of that and work out, okay, what is it that we really need to focus on, Where are the real commercial risks for the business? The lawyer who does best is the one who spends the time to get under the skin of the business, understand what management is trying to achieve strategically, and then laser-like focus on how do we help the business achieve that as a legal unit within the relevant business.
Yeah.
It's about alignment, and it's about the ability of the polite no, I would say.
I think that and that also comes into like relationship management with your business and and the people that you're supporting, as you say, to make sure that you're not just dealing with whoever's shouting that most loudly at you that week and dealing with their bit of work that they've got that may well not be that relevant. I think that's a really good point. Ben, from your perspective on the other side, what makes a great private practice lawyer? Someone that you see, you love it when they're on your case.
Well, it looks and sounds like Tony. That's all I'd say. And so I suppose I'm in a slightly better place or different place to answer this, having been in private practice and going through to partner at that level and getting out. So on the one hand, I'm in a better place because I've done it. On the other, I wanted to get out. So maybe I'm not. But okay, from my perspective, working with external advisors, and we've got very good relationships with a number of firms. Gowling, and I'll plug the guy. Chris Rogers is an amazing guy for us. Look, what you want to have is a relationship where you can pick up the phone, not necessarily at any hour, although that is sometimes helpful, and you can get a fairly quick gut reaction, sort of based on experience, based on something that they've seen it before, they've done it before, and then the detail can follow. What often is the trouble, and you will see this with more junior lawyers, just as they grow and learn, is that I don't necessarily need to see any workings once I know that person can do their job. What I do want is to have a reactive lawyer who can pick things up and be nimble, because often things are very fast paced in any in-house environment. Certainly in VC, deals can move incredibly quickly, particularly competitive ones. And so having that person who can basically get away from some of that classic lawyer arse covering in truth, and be able to say, well, actually, I think this is where we need to go, but I'll look into it for you, give you that initial steer. That's really helpful. I think, something I've always thought was incredibly important throughout is sort of an attention to detail element. I think that should be taken as given as a start point, because if the lawyers aren't paying attention to detail, who is? And look, you kind of alluded to it on the other foot with the in-house piece. A lot of it is just communication. It's having the ability to sort of spot those issues that others don't, and it's that blend, isn't it, of what's legal advice and what's commercial. Because what I don't necessarily want on my in-house side is to say, okay, external counsel, we're looking at doing this, and the external counsel just come back and exactly verbatim tell me what I need for that specific thing. But if they've seen the next client do something slightly differently, I would love to know about that, because that sort of insight into the rest of the industry is what I'm not necessarily going to get. So I would like to be able to have relationships where we can work symbiotically, and just as much as I need to understand the business, that means they need to understand my business too, and that's as much on me as anyone else to kind of communicate that.
Communication point, I think, is so important. And to both of you guys, what's the best bit of careers advice either of you have ever received, and who gave it to you?
So I think I'm gonna slightly cheat here and do two different levels of advice, because they're relevant to different stages of your career. Albeit the first one is relevant to all stages of your career, but it's really important early on, which is I think one of the problems for people who join the law is there's a belief and an expectation that you should know everything from day one, or that you should understand everything from day one. No one believes that you understand or know everything from day one. But what's critical is that you aren't afraid to continue to ask questions, to get to the point where, and I think this is the greatest skill of all of a lawyer, is to know what you don't know and be confident about it. That's a really, it sounds odd, but actually it's a really critical skill in terms of what we do, and allows you to be confident and articulate and honest about how to properly tackle an issue. There's nothing worse than a client thinking you've understood and got a hold of an issue, and they leave a call or a meeting thinking that you're off and running and can handle it, than people coming back and saying, well, actually, I forgot to ask this, or I didn't really understand that. Could you explain it again? Ask all the questions you need, and don't be afraid to do so. Know what you don't know. So that's my first bit of advice. The second bit of advice is about the move to partnership, and this is a partner of mine, Paul Blackmore, who was my supervisor at one point when I was an associate. When I was starting to think about approaching partnership, one of the things that he told me that really resonated at the time, and I think is something that it's incredibly hard actually as an associate to get your hands around, because it's not necessarily taught, it's not taught well in law firms at all, I think, is about ownership and understanding that as a partner in a firm, you are an owner of that firm. You're not just an employee. You're not just something away with the business. What you do, your career is your own. You own your little part of the business, and everyone looks to you as the owner of that business to manage it how you see fit, and that has an impact throughout your career. So understanding ownership, and as you start to progress through your career and get towards partnership, thinking like an owner will make you a better lawyer. It will definitely stand you out in the crowd, and those who understand that early are clearly more successful early in their journey through partnership than others.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Tony. Ben, how about you? Best piece of career advice you've had?
Yeah, well, I should have listened to Tony years ago back. That would have helped me a lot. Maybe I'll cheat as well and give two. But one of the things which perhaps this goes to a slightly more junior level than the sort of niche of this podcast, but right at the outset, that piece about attention to detail, if you don't do it at the early stage, you won't throughout your career. And if you're focusing on the end goal too early and you're not really learning your trade and taking the time to genuinely understand what it is you're doing and why, will come back to haunt you, because you need to have that framework. And that message came loud and clear to me, because I messed up on a very simple document, got an absolute bollocking from the partner, who was deeply unimpressed with my work, told me that I needed to work on my attention to detail. And this was about 3 weeks in as a paralegal. At this I had a post-it note on my computer right the way through to being a partner, which just said ATD on it, and I never forgot that, because it definitely improved me as a lawyer, because it comes second nature. The second part is, my background was at a firm called Ori Clark, who were unusual because they're multidisciplinary. So they had lawyers and accountants and financial consultants and recruiters. They did a whole bunch of things. And where we found at that firm some real success, but also felt like it was something that the market was crying out for, was basically having an understanding of the bigger picture. It didn't mean you had to be an expert in any of it. In fact, far from. You can be very dangerous if you think you are. But with getting an understanding as a lawyer of where you fit in with the other disciplines around you, and having those trigger points to think, well, okay, that's all great. We're legally, let's go this route. But actually, if you know that there is a tax consequence for doing that, and then you can bring in your, as it was for me, colleague or your tax advisor, whoever it might be, to have that piece, that felt like that was a real game changer, because clients could look to you for essentially much more of a holistic advisory service that made you more valuable. And I'm very conscious of the fact that software is going to be doing a lot of jobs that junior lawyers are doing in the quite near future. So you have to find out where you can add value. And to me, having that sort of bigger strategic piece in mind as you develop, particularly as you get more senior, that can really help, and will make you more valuable and less dispensable to your clients.
Wise counsel, both of you. Thank you very much for that. So just before we break, every guest on the General Counselling podcast, we're asking the same question, which is, who is your GOAT lawyer? And so for those uninitiated into sports anachronisms, GOAT stands for greatest of all time. And I think for the purpose of this, we're going to open it up to be alive, dead, real, or fictional. So it's going to be a wide range. It's going to be a wide range of potentials. But Tony, who would you say greatest of all time lawyer for you?
Well, one of my lockdown projects for myself is I have been catching up on classic movies. So I love movies, but I've been terrible to date for really only watching movies that have come out in my lifetime. So I've dug back into some of the classics over the course of lockdown, and really enjoyed doing that. And one of the ones that I love the most, there's a film called Inherit the Wind. I don't know if you've heard of that. Inherit the Wind is old. I think it's a 50s movie, and it's a Spencer Tracy movie. Really got to like Spencer Tracy, great actor. And it's a fictionalized account of a real trial that took place in the early 20th century in the States, that was a challenge in a small local town in the States that became a cause celeb across the States, where the small local town refused to teach evolution. Refused to teach evolution, and it attracted a local teacher who insisted on teaching evolution was arrested and put on trial, and it attracted attention right across the nation, and in particular attracted the attention of a lawyer called Clarence Darrow. Now, Clarence Darrow is a fantastic lawyer, played by Spencer Tracy in the movie, who, by all accounts, was one of the great advocates of the era, and he was obviously in favor of evolution. I highly recommend the movie. I won't spoil the ending as how it plays out, but go back and dig that out. So Spencer Tracy in Inherit the Wind, playing Clarence.
He's your go. I hope he wins, but well, we'll see.
Well, you have to watch and find out.
Ben.
Well, as a flat earther, I'm shocked at that response.
You're going to go Roger Cohen, I think. Is that my guess?
No, I was convinced you were going to say Reese Witherspoon's character in Legally Blonde, Tony. I'm very disappointed.
That's probably a better choice.
I wish you'd clarified this earlier, Tom, because I've been looking for famous farm animals who are also lawyers, but the goat thing has really threw me. So thanks for helping. No, look, there's an awful. I did sort of have a little peek to see who I could choose, and there's some amazing, lawyers. Maybe they're not known for being lawyers out there, including like Mandela, Gandhi, Obama, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So there's some great names there. And actually, I was presented my law degree by Shami Chakrabarti, who has also done some incredible work in and around human rights and all the things she does for the law in this country. I've worked with some amazing people too. Got to mention Mr. Ross Meadows at Ori Clark, who was absolutely inspirational to me as I developed. So he was a close second. But actually, my sort of goat is a guy who was the general counsel at Slalom, which is a global consultancy, and I worked a lot with them when I was in private practice. He's now their chief legal officer. But this guy, Jim Mitchell, he basically was the inspiration for me becoming in-house, and really showed me how that role could be done. He always projected an air of calm. I'm still working on that. He worried about the things that others in the business didn't want to have to worry about, and made sure that they were covered. He understood that you couldn't do everything in one day, and that you needed to build out projects and teams to achieve the goal of the business. And it seemed to me that he sort of had really managed to embed legal within the business in a sensible way that meant that it wasn't perceived as a blocker, but was a facilitator for the business to do great things. So he was my sort of role model, if you like, as to what an in-house lawyer could be. And so
we'll definitely be sending him a link to the podcast of his Clarence Darrow and Jim Mitchell so far are our first two GOAT lawyers. So high praise indeed. Guys, thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed that. Really appreciate your insight and your advice on this space. So thank you so much for being guests. Thanks everyone for listening. Remember, please subscribe, leave us a review, follow the Montresor Legal LinkedIn page. We'd love a share to spread the word. Thanks very much. I'll see you all next time.